at this tomato. Big, red, shiny, perfectly round. It looks exactly like the tomato you'd see in a textbook or a fast food commercial. Now look at this one, smaller, rougher, kind of lumpy. It doesn't look like much at all. But here's something most people will never hear from any grocery store or food company. That small, ugly tomato from 1950 had dramatically more vitamin C, significantly more iron, and considerably more calcium than the perfect-looking specimen sitting on your supermarket shelf right now. And this isn't some fringe claim from a conspiracy blog. This comes directly from a landmark study published in December 2004 in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition. A team of researchers at the University of Texas at Austin, led by Professor Donald Davis, compared USDA nutritional data from 1950 and 1999 for 43 different garden crops. They studied everything from asparagus and snap beans to strawberries and watermelon. What they found was deeply unsettling. Reliable, measurable declines in protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin, and vitamin C. Not in one or two crops. Across the board, the declines ranged from 6% for protein all the way up to 38% for riboflavin. And here's the kicker. There were likely declines in other nutrients too, like magnesium, zinc, and vitamins B6 and E, but those weren't even tracked in the 1950 data. So we don't fully know how much we've lost. Let me put that in perspective for you. If your grandmother ate one orange in 1950 and you eat one orange today, you're getting measurably less nutrition from that same piece of fruit. Not because you chose a bad orange, but because the food supply itself has been quietly losing its nutritional density for decades. Scientists now have a name for this phenomenon. They call it the nutrient collapse. And the implications go far beyond your dinner plate. Because here's the real thesis of this video, and I need you to sit with it for a second before we move on. The global economy is not just driven by central banks, interest rate decisions, and fiat currency. It is driven, at the most fundamental level, by a 100-year biological cycle of soil and agriculture. A cycle that almost nobody in mainstream finance is talking about. A cycle that was first identified by government scientists in the 1930s, in the aftermath of the worst agricultural disaster in American history. And that cycle is converging on the present day, right now, in 2026. The wealthiest, most sophisticated investors on the planet have already figured this out. Bill Gates, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, they're all making the same quiet bet. And by the time this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why they're doing it. What it means for the global economy and how it connects to your personal financial future in ways you've probably never considered. This is World Economy Reborn. And this might be the most important video we've ever made. Let's get into it. But before we dive in, understand this. What I'm about to walk you through isn't speculative. Every data point comes from published, peer-reviewed research or official government sources, the University of Texas, the USDA, NASA satellite data, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Bank. This isn't theory. This is documented reality that mainstream financial media almost entirely ignores because it doesn't fit into a quarterly earnings cycle. The soil cycle operates on a different clock, and that clock is running out of time. To understand what's happening in 2026, we need to go back 90 years, to a man that most people have never heard of, and a disaster that fundamentally reshaped the American economy, displaced over 3 million people, and created a government agency that still operates to this day. His name was Hugh Hammond Bennett, born on April 15, 1881, on a 1,500-acre cotton farm near Wadesboro in Anson County, North Carolina. Bennett grew up watching what erosion did to land firsthand. By the time he was 10 years old, he understood something that most economists still haven't fully grasped, that the condition of the soil determines everything built on top of it. Bennett graduated from the University of North Carolina in 1903 and immediately went to work as a soil surveyor for the United States Department of Agriculture. For the next 2 decades, he walked the land, not figuratively, literally. He traveled across the country and internationally, advising on soil projects in Alaska, Brazil, Cuba, and South Africa, studying the dirt beneath people's feet, while most scientists considered it barely worth their time. But Bennett saw something that almost nobody else was paying attention to. He saw that American farmland was slowly dying. Sheet erosion, the quiet, invisible stripping of topsoil by water and wind, was happening everywhere. Farmers were plowing relentlessly, growing the same crops season after season, tearing out native vegetation to squeeze more yield from every acre. And the thin layer of biologically active topsoil that made all of it possible was washing and blowing away faster than anyone realized. By the 1920s, Bennett was writing prolifically about the crisis. He published articles in scientific journals like Scientific Monthly and popular magazines like Country Gentleman. He called soil erosion a national menace. He wrote that Americans had been the greatest destroyers of land of any race or people, barbaric or civilized. Strong words. People dismissed him as an alarmist. Then came the 1930s, and the Dust Bowl proved every word correct. Most people think of the Dust Bowl as a freak weather event, a drought that hit the Great Plains and kicked up some bad dust storms. But that's a dangerously incomplete story. The Dust Bowl was an economic catastrophe caused by the systematic destruction of natural biology for short-term agricultural profit. For decades, settlers across Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and the surrounding states had ripped up millions of acres of native grassland to plant wheat. The prices were good during the booming 20s. The land was cheap. Nobody was planning for what would happen when the rain stopped and the wind picked up. When the drought arrived in 1931, the topsoil, which those native prairie grasses had anchored for thousands of years, had nothing holding it down. It simply blew away. Massive dust storms rolled across the plains, some reaching heights of 10,000 feet. Walls of dirt so thick they blotted out the midday sun. On April 14th, 1935, a day they would call Black Sunday, an estimated 300 million tons of topsoil was ripped from the earth in a single afternoon. Livestock suffocated, farms were buried. Children developed what they called dust pneumonia, and the economic devastation compounded the already catastrophic Great Depression. Here's the detail from this era that I find most remarkable. Bennett had been trying to convince Congress to take action for years. He had even poured water onto a conference table in front of senators to physically demonstrate how erosion works. But on the day of his most critical testimony in 1935, he knew from weather reports that a massive dust cloud was heading east. So he deliberately stalled. He dragged out his testimony, repeated his points, talked in circles. And then, right on cue, the dust cloud rolled over Washington, D.C., darkening the sky outside the Capitol windows. Bennett pointed to the window and essentially said, "That, gentlemen, is exactly what I've been talking about." Congress passed the Soil Conservation Act of 1935 unanimously. Bennett became the first director of the new Soil Conservation Service. He held that position until 1951, spending 16 years trying to undo the damage and educate a nation about a truth that should have been obvious from the start. But here's what Bennett understood at a level that transcended politics and policy. Topsoil isn't just dirt. It's a living, breathing biological organism. A single teaspoon of healthy topsoil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. All of them cycling nutrients, building soil structure, making it possible for plants to absorb what they need to grow. And this system takes an astonishing amount of time to develop. Scientists estimate it takes between 500 and 1,000 years, some estimates say longer, to form a single inch of topsoil. You read that right. Half a millennium to build 1 inch. But modern agriculture can strip that same inch away in a matter of years through aggressive tilling and chemical treatment. That asymmetry, centuries to build, decades to destroy, is the central economic tension of this entire story. And the temporary solution humanity found for it created an even bigger problem down the road. If Bennett's generation understood that topsoil was being destroyed, and if the Dust Bowl proved them right in the most devastating way imaginable, then here's the obvious question. How are we producing more food than ever before in 2026? How did we go from agricultural collapse to record harvests in less than a century? The answer is one of the most consequential inventions in human history. Most people have never heard of it, but without it, nearly half the people on Earth right now would not be alive. It's called the Haber-Bosch process. In 1909, a German chemist named Fritz Haber demonstrated in his laboratory that he could pull nitrogen gas directly from the air and combine it with hydrogen in the presence of an iron catalyst under extreme heat and pressure to produce ammonia. This was the building block of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. His colleague Carl Bosch, an engineer at the German chemical company BASF, then figured out how to scale this tabletop experiment to industrial production. By 1913, the first factory-scale Haber-Bosch plant was operating in Oppau, Germany. Both Haber and Bosch eventually received Nobel Prizes for their work. Haber in 1918, Bosch in 1931. To understand why this changed everything, you need to understand nitrogen. Nitrogen is the single most critical nutrient for plant growth. It's a component of every protein, every strand of DNA, every amino acid, and every living cell on the planet. It makes up roughly 78% of the atmosphere. It's literally all around us. But here's the cruel irony of biology. Plants cannot use atmospheric nitrogen. It's too stable. The triple bond holding the nitrogen molecule together is one of the strongest chemical bonds in nature. For all of agricultural history before 1913, we're talking 10,000 years of farming, the only way to get usable nitrogen into soil was through slow natural processes. Certain soil bacteria could fix atmospheric nitrogen. Lightning strikes converted small amounts. Farmers could use animal manure and crop rotation with legumes. But these methods were limited. They capped how much food humanity could produce. And by the late 1800s, scientists like William Crookes president of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, were openly warning that the world was heading toward mass famine unless a new source of nitrogen could be found. Haber-Bosch shattered that ceiling. For the first time in human history, we could manufacture soil fertility out of thin air, literally pulling nitrogen from the atmosphere and converting it into crop food. Today, the Haber-Bosch process produces over 230 million tons of ammonia annually and consumes roughly 3 to 5% of the world's entire natural gas supply. A 2008 study published in Nature Geoscience estimated that without this single chemical process, approximately half the world's population would not have enough food. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization puts it plainly: synthetic fertilizer contributes over 40% to global food production. But here's the part nobody mentions at the Nobel ceremonies. Synthetic fertilizer doesn't rebuild soil, it bypasses it entirely. Think of it like this. If healthy soil is a person's digestive system, synthetic fertilizer is an IV drip. The patient stays alive, but the underlying organ keeps deteriorating because nobody's actually fixing it. What synthetic nitrogen does is force rapid plant growth. The crops get bigger, yields explode upward. The farmer makes money, but the billions of bacteria, fungi, and mycorrhizal networks that naturally cycle nutrients through healthy soil get sidelined. Over time, those biological communities collapse. The soil compacts. Its ability to hold water and cycle nutrients deteriorates, and each year, the farmer needs more synthetic input to achieve the same output. Does that dynamic sound familiar? It should, because it's the exact same pattern we see in monetary policy. You print more money to stimulate economic growth. It works at first, but each successive round of stimulus produces less impact per dollar created. You need more and more currency to generate the same level of real economic output. Economists call this the law of diminishing returns. In agriculture, researchers call it nutrient dilution. Different fields, same fundamental principle, same inevitable endgame. In the 1930s, U.S. farmers grew less than 1,500 kilograms of corn per hectare. Today, they produce over 10,000 kilograms per hectare. That's an almost sevenfold increase in yield. We celebrate those numbers. But the system producing them now depends entirely on a fossil fuel-powered chemical process that was invented before World War I. We didn't solve the soil problem, we financed it. We created what I call a fiat food system, dependent not on biological reality, but on energy inputs we pump from the ground. And just like a fiat currency that isn't backed by anything tangible, this fiat food system only works as long as the inputs keep flowing. The moment those inputs become too expensive or too scarce, and we'll get to why that's starting to happen right now, the entire foundation starts to shake. Research published by Jennifer Fox found that communication pathways between plants and nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria are actually damaged by excessive synthetic nitrogen application. In other words, the more we use the synthetic hack, the more we destroy the soil's natural ability to feed itself. It's a dependency cycle, the agricultural equivalent of an economy addicted to stimulus spending. Now here's where the story gets personal. Because the nutrient collapse isn't something that only matters to farmers and soil scientists. It's affecting your body right now. And it's doing it so quietly that most people have no idea it's happening. Let me walk you through the data. That University of Texas study I mentioned at the top of this video, the one examining 43 crops between 1950 and 1999, found declines that weren't minor anomalies. Protein content fell 6%, calcium declined 16%, phosphorus dropped 9%, iron and vitamin C each fell 15%. And riboflavin, a B vitamin that plays a critical role in energy metabolism and cellular function, crashed 38%. That's not noise, that's a trend. And it's not just an American phenomenon. In the United Kingdom, a study published in the International Journal of Food, Sciences and Nutrition compared mineral content of British fruits and vegetables across decades, starting from data collected in the 1940s. The researchers found significant declines in calcium, magnesium, copper, and iron across both categories. A separate analysis by the Cauchy Institute found that between 1975 and 1997, average calcium levels in 12 common fresh vegetables dropped 27%, iron dropped 37%, vitamin A fell 21%, and vitamin C declined 30%. Some individual numbers are staggering. Cauliflower lost roughly 60% of its iron. Collard greens lost 81%. Watercress lost nearly 88%. On the fruit side, lemons saw a 57% decline in calcium. Pineapples lost nearly 59%. Think about that for a second. The food isn't just slightly less nutritious. In some cases, you would need to eat 3 or 4 servings of a modern vegetable to match the mineral content of a single serving from the 1970s. Now I want to be responsible about this. Fruits and vegetables are still among the most nutrient-dense foods you can eat. Professor Davis himself cautioned that the decline doesn't mean you should stop eating produce. Far from it. These foods remain your best source of essential vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. The point is not that food is worthless. The point is that the baseline is falling, and it's been falling for decades, and almost nobody is connecting this to the larger economic picture. So let me connect it for you. Think about it through an economic lens. If the raw materials going into the human body are declining in quality, then over time, the outputs that society depends on, cognitive performance, physical resilience, immune function, healthy aging, come under pressure too. It's the same principle that applies to any production system. The quality of inputs determines the quality of outputs. And in this case, the production system is nearly 8 billion human beings trying to function on food grown in increasingly depleted soil. Healthcare spending in developed nations has been climbing relentlessly. In the United States alone, it consumes an ever-growing share of GDP. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not going to sit here and claim that soil depletion is the single cause of rising healthcare costs. That would be simplistic and intellectually dishonest. There are dozens of contributing factors. But if the foundational nutrition in the food supply has been quietly degrading for 70-plus years, while chronic disease rates have been climbing, it's not unreasonable to consider these trends as part of the same larger system. The food supply is an economic input. It's slow-moving. It's invisible to most financial models. But it shapes everything downstream. And this invisible economic force is what the smartest investors in the world have quietly started positioning around. There's another dimension to this that rarely gets discussed. The nutrient dilution effect doesn't just reduce the vitamin and mineral content of crops. It also affects their protein density. When plants grow faster due to synthetic nitrogen, they absorb more water and carbohydrates, which dilutes the concentration of everything else. This is sometimes called the dilution effect in agricultural science. You get a bigger, heavier crop that looks impressive on a yield chart, but delivers less nutritional value per calorie consumed. In practical terms, this means the global food system is producing more bulk calories than ever, while simultaneously delivering fewer of the micronutrients that human bodies need to function optimally. For developing countries that are already struggling with what the World Health Organization calls hidden hunger, populations that consume enough calories to survive, but not enough micronutrients to thrive, this trend is especially dangerous. But it's not limited to the developing world. Even in wealthy nations with abundant food supply, the gap between caloric sufficiency and nutritional sufficiency is quietly widening, and the economic consequences of that gap compound over decades, showing up in ways that are difficult to trace back to their source. Here's a rule I've learned after years of studying economic cycles. If you want to know what's really happening in an economy, don't listen to what powerful people say. Watch what they buy. Bill Gates is now the largest private owner of farmland in the United States. According to the 2025 Land Report, he owns roughly 275,000 acres, spread across almost 20 states, with approximately 248,000 of those being active farmland. His investment vehicle, Cascade Investment, has been building this portfolio for over a decade, and much of it was done extremely quietly. In 2017, Cascade paid $520 million for a massive portfolio of farmland that had previously been owned by the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. The very next year, he acquired another 14,500 acres in Washington State's Horseheaven Hills for roughly $170 million. Those two deals alone represent over $690 million invested in agricultural land, but Gates is just the most visible example. The trend runs much deeper than one billionaire. Warren Buffett has been vocal for decades about farmland being a sensible long-term investment. Jeff Bezos has backed platforms like Arrived that allow ordinary investors to buy fractional shares of real estate, including agricultural properties. Ted Turner owns over 2 million acres, much of it ranch and farmland. Thomas Peterffy, the founder of Interactive Brokers, holds roughly 560,000 acres. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints maintains enormous agricultural holdings. Nuveen, the global investment manager, controls over 2 million acres of farmland across multiple continents. The Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association of America has invested billions through its agricultural subsidiary, Westchester Group. The Ontario Teachers Pension Plan dropped billions acquiring prime agricultural land, including over 6,000 acres of orchard territory in Washington state. Ask yourself, why are some of the most financially sophisticated entities on the planet quietly accumulating dirt? Not tech stocks, not crypto, not glass tower commercial real estate, actual soil. The answer connects directly to everything we've been discussing. Farmland is a finite, tangible, inflation-resistant asset that produces an essential commodity. You cannot print more of it. You cannot fabricate it in a lab. And as the biological quality of existing agricultural land continues to degrade, the remaining parcels that still have healthy soil, reliable water access, and productive capacity become exponentially more valuable. The USDA estimates that approximately 30% of American farmland is now owned by non-farmer landlords. That's roughly 268 million acres being rented to tenant farmers by owners who don't work the land themselves. And the concentration keeps increasing. This is not random. These institutional purchases tend to target properties with very specific characteristics: proven soil quality, existing water infrastructure, permitted wells, and established irrigation systems. Here's a telling detail. In Nebraska, Gates's farmland holdings include access to 191 existing water wells. Think about that. He didn't just buy land, he bought land that came with guaranteed water access. Because in agricultural investment, water rights are frequently more valuable than the acreage itself. Land without water is just expensive scenery. And this brings us to one of the most critical geographic pressure points in this entire story: California's Central Valley, often called the breadbasket of America. This single region produces roughly 25% of the food consumed in the entire United States, over 250 types of crops, an estimated agricultural output of $17 billion a year. It's one of the most productive agricultural zones on the planet, and it's running out of water. NASA's GRACE satellite missions have documented something alarming. Groundwater depletion in the Central Valley has been accelerating since 2003. During the recent mega drought in the southwestern United States, the rate of depletion jumped nearly fivefold compared to the 60-year average. Parts of the San Joaquin Valley have been sinking more than 2 feet per year from excessive pumping. Total land subsidence since the 1920s has reached up to 28 feet in some areas. That sinking isn't just cosmetic damage. It permanently compresses the aquifer, reducing its ability to store water even when rain does come. The damage is irreversible. And the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which requires local agencies to achieve sustainability by 2042, is forcing farmers to take land out of production, fallow fields, and make painful economic decisions. Oklahoma in the 1930s, California in the 2020s, different eras, same fundamental story: treating a finite biological system as if it's infinite, and then being shocked when the bill comes due. Corporations are also increasingly buying farmland in the American West, specifically to secure water rights, not just crop potential. When water becomes the bottleneck, the land that has it becomes the most strategic asset on the board. And right now, a lot of very wealthy, very well-informed entities are positioning their pieces accordingly. Let's bring all of these threads together now, because when you see how they converge, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. Thread 1, topsoil loss. A study from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, covered by the Smithsonian, found that the American Midwest alone has lost 57.6 billion metric tons of topsoil in the 160 years since farmers first began tilling the land. The erosion rate is estimated to be roughly double what the USDA considers sustainable. The Union of Concerned Scientists projects that at current trends, the United States will lose the equivalent of over 300 years' worth of soil by 2100. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has warned that at current rates of global soil degradation, the world may have approximately 60 years of topsoil remaining. 1 inch of topsoil takes between 500 and 1,000 years to form naturally. We are losing it 10 to 40 times faster than it can regenerate. Thread 2, the synthetic fertilizer system is cracking. The global system we built to compensate for degrading soil is itself under growing pressure. In 2022, fertilizer prices spiked dramatically after Russia's invasion of Ukraine disrupted global supply chains. Russia is the world's largest fertilizer supplier, and the combination of sanctions, export restrictions, and energy price surges created a worldwide squeeze that nearly tripled costs for some products. Prices came down from those peaks, but they never returned to pre-crisis levels. And in 2025, they're climbing again. The American Farm Bureau Federation reports that phosphate fertilizers are leading price increases in 2025. Potash is up roughly 21% from 2024, and natural gas prices, the primary feedstock for nitrogen fertilizer production, are projected to keep rising through 2026 as LNG export capacity expands. Meanwhile, China, which produces nearly a third of the world's fertilizer, has been restricting exports to prioritize domestic supply and its electric vehicle battery manufacturing sector. The EU has imposed tariffs on fertilizer from Russia and Belarus. The World Bank's fertilizer price index is expected to remain well above its 2015-2019 average for the foreseeable future. Thread 3, water depletion. California's Central Valley, which produces roughly 25% of the food consumed in America, valued at about $17 billion annually, is experiencing an accelerating groundwater crisis. NASA's GRACE satellite data shows that groundwater depletion in the Central Valley has been accelerating since 2003. During the recent megadrought, the depletion rate jumped nearly fivefold compared to the 60-year average. Parts of the San Joaquin Valley have sunk more than 2 feet per year from excessive pumping. Total subsidence since the 1920s has reached 28 feet in some areas, permanently reducing the aquifer's capacity to store water. The Ogallala Aquifer beneath the Great Plains, which irrigates roughly 30% of American cropland, has been in decline for decades. These underground water systems took thousands of years to fill. We're draining them in generations. Thread 4, the financial debt cycle. And this is where regular viewers of this channel will see the pieces snap together. The global financial debt supercycle, the 100-year pattern of credit expansion, overleveraging, and eventual contraction that we discuss frequently on this channel, aligns almost perfectly with this agricultural degradation cycle. The last time all of these forces converged was the 1930s. Massive private and public debt, severely degraded farmland, overleveraged agricultural producers, economic depression. We are not predicting a repeat of the Dust Bowl. The world is different. The technology is better. But the underlying pattern, treating a biological system as an extractive one, prioritizing short-term yield over long-term sustainability, and financing away the consequences until the bill arrives, that pattern is unmistakably repeating. The fertilizer price index keeps climbing. Farm margins are being compressed between rising input costs and falling commodity prices. The share of farmland owned by non-farmers keeps growing, and underneath all of it, the soil continues to degrade. To put a finer point on the geopolitics, Russia, Belarus, Canada, and China together control roughly 78% of global potash trade. The United States imports nearly 90% of its potash supply. If trade relationships with any of those countries deteriorate further, and given current geopolitical tensions, that's not hypothetical, American farmers face artificially inflated input costs with no easy alternatives. Meanwhile, energy costs continue to be the wild card. Natural gas is the primary feedstock for nitrogen fertilizer, and with LNG export terminal capacity expanding, domestic U.S. gas prices face upward pressure as more supply gets redirected to international markets. This means the cost of producing ammonia, urea, and other nitrogen products will likely stay elevated, squeezing farmers on both sides, higher input costs, and volatile commodity revenue. The economics of farming are becoming a vice grip, and the biological foundation those economics sit on keeps getting thinner. So what does all of this actually mean for you? Let me start by saying what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to tell you to panic. I'm not going to tell you to sell everything and go buy a farm tomorrow. This isn't that kind of channel. And frankly, panic is never a productive economic strategy. What I am going to do is share the framework that I think makes the most sense given everything we've just walked through. For the last several decades, the dominant wealth narrative has been about abstraction, digital assets, financial derivatives, options on options, numbers on screens representing numbers on other screens. And at the high end, urban real estate priced not for its utility, but for its speculative premium. These asset classes have performed remarkably well in many cases, and I'm not dismissing any of them. But underneath all of that abstraction, there is a physical layer, a biological layer, a layer that does not care about Federal Reserve announcements, earnings calls, or stock market sentiment. It operates on geological timescales, and that layer, soil, water, agricultural capacity, is where the real constraints on human civilization live. Always have, always will. The billionaires and pension funds accumulating farmland aren't doing it because they think corn futures are going to spike next quarter. They're doing it because they understand a principle that most investors overlook. In a world of infinite digital replication, the things that genuinely cannot be replicated become the most valuable assets of all. You can create new cryptocurrency networks overnight. You can build another high-rise condo tower. You can print trillions of dollars of currency. But you cannot create more topsoil. You cannot fabricate new freshwater aquifers. You cannot engineer the biological complexity of billions of microorganisms that make land actually productive. That's the fundamental insight. And it applies whether you're a professional investor evaluating asset allocation, a young family thinking about where to buy property, or someone simply trying to understand where the real economy is heading rather than where the cable news pundits say it's going. There's a reason that throughout all of human history, from ancient Mesopotamia to medieval Europe to the American frontier, the ownership of productive land has been the most reliable store of wealth across civilizations. Not gold, not currency, not financial instruments. Land. Because land is where food comes from. And food is the one economic product that 8 billion people need every single day, without exception. That has never changed, and it never will. The value of real estate is shifting, quietly, not in the headlines, but in the actual deal flow. It's moving away from over-leveraged urban properties with astronomical price-to-income ratios and toward affordable land with genuine productive capacity. Land with water access, land with healthy soil, properties that function not just as financial instruments sitting on a balance sheet, but as actual biological assets capable of producing the one thing every human being needs every single day: food. Hugh Hammond Bennett, the father of soil conservation, said something almost 90 years ago that I think about constantly. He said, "Take care of the land and the land will take care of you." That wasn't a motivational bumper sticker. It was an economic forecast. And 9 decades later, with topsoil disappearing, water tables dropping, fertilizer costs rising, and the smartest money on the planet quietly buying dirt, his words have never been more relevant. The economy is not just charts and graphs and quarterly earnings reports and Federal Reserve press conferences. At its most basic level, the economy is the ground beneath our feet. It's the water in the aquifer. It's the biological activity in the first 6 inches of topsoil. And when you start seeing the economy through that lens, through the lens of what is physically, biologically real, everything else starts to make a lot more sense. The debt cycles, the creeping inflation, the institutional land grabs, the nutrient data nobody talks about, it all connects. If this video opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. Share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear this. Because the information in this video isn't going to come from mainstream financial media anytime soon. They're too busy covering stock tickers to look at the dirt underneath the tickers. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell because we are going to keep pulling back the curtain on these hidden forces that actually drive the global economy. This is World Economy Reborn, and we're just getting started. One last thought. I started this video by showing you 2 tomatoes, one big and beautiful, one small and rough. The beautiful one looked like a better deal, but the ugly one was actually richer in every way that mattered. I think there's a lesson in that metaphor that extends far beyond agriculture. In economics, in investing, in life, the things that look the most impressive on the surface are not always the things with the most substance underneath. And the things that look unremarkable, the things that require patience and care and a long time horizon, are often the things that end up being worth the most in the end. That's the real lesson of the 100-year agricultural cycle, and it's a lesson I think everyone watching this video needed to hear today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.